Here's everything you might have missed in the Loki finale. All good things must come to an end, and Loki was one extremely good thing. Over the course of 6 episodes, we saw new sides of the God of Mischief as he explored the bureaucratic nightmare that is the Time Variance Authority, the emotional nightmare that is confronting one's inner demons, and the ineluctable nightmare that is learning your best friend could have been riding a sweet-ass jet ski this entire time.
It'll be fun, though.
Yeah, it'll be really fun.
After conquering the gaseous murder monster Alioth and wandering beyond the void to the edges of time and space as we know them, Loki and Sylvie journeyed into mystery. In episode 6, titled For All Time Always, we had a truly epic conclusion to this weird and wonderful journey we've been on. With mind-bending conversations, timeline trickery, and shocking reveals, it was a fitting finale for the God of Mischief's Disney Plus series, and sets the stage for so much more MCU goodness to come. And by the way, if you haven't watched that mid-credit scene yet, go do that right now, you mewling quims. Anyway, we turned our finest TVA agents loose on this episode to uncover all the myriad Easter eggs, references, and hidden details that you might have missed. And as always, if you prefer to read all about it, we've got you covered over on Nerdist.com, which I will link to in the description below. However, to talk about this episode in detail, we obviously need to spoil what happened, so if you haven't watched it yet or you accidentally clicked this video because an older boy dared you to, leave now before someone kicks this door wide open. Okie dokie, folks, let's get into it, shall we? Now let me start off by saying one thing. We motherfucking call that shit, baby! Kang Watch! Kang Watch! Let's f***ing go! Kang Watch! What's good? Kang Watch. Excuse me. What I meant to say is our Kang Watch has officially begun in earnest, because after Loki episode 6, we need to watch over our shoulders for Kangs coming out of the woodwork. I'm talking Iron Lad, Immortus, Ramatot, the Council of Cross-Time Kangs, you name it, they're coming. Because after the Loki finale, the multiverse of madness is officially upon us, and all hell is about to break loose in the MCU. And now, for those who don't know, allow me to explain what I mean when I talk about Kang and Kang Watch. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Kang the Conqueror is one of the greatest villains in Marvel Comics history. Most frequently, he fights with the Fantastic Four and the Avengers. First appearing in 1963's Fantastic Four 19 as the ancient Egyptian ruler Rama-Tut, and in 1964's Avengers number 8 as the green and purple madman Kang, he's a time-traveling tyrant from the 31st century named Nathaniel Richards. He's appeared in many different variations over the years: Rama-Tut, Immortus, Kang the Conqueror, Iron Lad, Scarlet Centurion, the list goes on and on. And while these variants are all different, they largely share one commonality. They seek to establish order in the universe, typically by establishing Kang as the ruler of all reality by conquering each and every timeline in the multiverse. You know, basically exactly what the TVA's been doing this entire time. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's start back at the beginning. During the opening credits, we hear the sweet strains of the Harry James recording of It's Been a Long, Long Time. It's the song that Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter finally get to dance to in Avengers Endgame, some 70 years after the events of Captain America: The First Avenger. And it's a moment that served as a fitting capstone for the time-traveling antics of the Infinity Saga, but here it's a prelude to pandemonium, because we then hear a cavalcade of different songs, radio frequencies, and familiar voices, both real and fictional, as the episode opens with a wild sequence that has shades of the magical mystery tour from Doctor Strange and the opening of Contact. Sam Wilson eggs on Scott Lang in Civil War, Hope Van Dyne says that's how you punch from Ant-Man, Black Panther utters his immortal Wakanda forever, and so on and so forth as we hear iconic line from our favorite characters. Next, we hear an excerpt from Alan Watts' Mystery of Time lecture as we zoom away from the sun out of a galaxy. We also hear Neil Armstrong's One Small Step for Man adage and Greta Thunberg's Denver University climate change rallying cry of "How dare they" as the music warps in the background. We then witness a Big Bang-style event, the creation of a new universe, or in this case, universes. As it explodes, we hear Malala Yousafzai and Nelson Mandela offering us hope for the future, and classic Loki shouting "Glorious purpose!" like he did in episode 5 when facing down Alioth. We see not one, but 2 different universes here. Maybe it's the MCU and the SPUMC, the Sony Pictures universe of Marvel characters. Or maybe it's even the old Fox Marvel universe. Who knows? As we continue soaring, we hear Vision's infamous WandaVision line, "What is grief, if not love persevering?" followed by Maya Angelou. We then travel through a blue and white tunnel that we soon realize to be the time stream itself, before Sylvie brings Loki and us as the viewer back to reality with a simple "open your eyes." As the sound fades away, we emerge on a circular asteroid with a mysterious mansion seated atop it. The front entrance to this building is flanked by twin pillars emblazoned with hourglasses, and the building itself is black, fractured with these bright golden lines of energy. It gives the sense that this place could tear apart at any moment, and it evokes the Japanese art form of kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with golden lacquer to highlight imperfections. Sylvie and Loki stand on the precipice of the building, and for once, they're both too nervous to act. For Sylvie, it's kind of like the case of a dog that finally catches a car and just doesn't know what to do with it.
Okay, shut up.
Time waits for no man, though, and especially not for two gods of mischief. The door swings open, and they're greeted by everyone's favorite anthropomorphic clock / my sleep paralysis demon, Miss Minutes.
Hey, y'all.
They're standing in an antechamber filled with two massive statues, and at first glance, these cloaked figures do evoke Doctor Doom. But they're really just sleeker versions of Kang the Conqueror, as we'll soon see. In a close-up shot, it looks like the statues have clocks for faces underneath their hoods, holding what appears to be a model of the building in their hands. I'm a little unclear what they're actually holding. If you know, let me know in the comments below. Now, Miss Minutes reveals they are actually in the Citadel at the end of time, summoned by He Who Remains. First appearing in 1976's Thor number 245, He Who Remains was the final director of the Time Variance Authority who dwelled within the Citadel at the end of time, a fortress in the last surviving reality of the multiverse, kinda like what we see here. Now, he originally created the Time Twisters, a trio of beings intended to survive the end of the universe and go on to impart their wisdom to the next cycle of life. But they were born flawed and traveled back in time with destruction on their mind. So after Thor, Jane Foster, and the Warriors 3 stopped these corrupted creations, He Who Remains then created the Time Keepers instead. Now, in the comics, it's important to note He Who Remains is not the same character as Kang the Conqueror. But as we'll soon see, He Who Remains here is a variant of Kang the Conqueror, played by Jonathan Majors. But before we get there, Miss Minutes makes our Lokis an awfully tempting offer, one which will ultimately tear them apart, it seems. Miss Minutes offers to reinsert both Loki and Sylvie back into the timeline in exchange for leaving He Who Remains well enough alone. She offers to let Loki not only win the Battle of New York, but kill Thanos and sit on the throne of Asgard as well. So maybe that's where those unused trailer shots of King Loki and the throne of Asgard and Loki standing in Stark Tower were from. Mark Mothersbaugh's Twilight of the Gods from Thor Ragnarok plays in the background as Loki seriously considers getting everything he ever wanted. And although this offer is tempting, neither Sylvie nor Loki are willing to reject the notion of free will in exchange for some cosmic bribe. Meanwhile, back at the TVA, Ravonna Renslayer frantically looks through files and wistfully looks at the rings left behind by Mobius. Miss Minute shows up and apologizes for taking her sweet time now, y'all, and that cagey little clock doesn't give Ravonna the files she actually asked for about the creation of the TVA. Rather, she gives her files that He Who Remains thinks will be more up her alley.
Happy reading.
Meanwhile, in the Citadel, Loki and Sylvie enter another chamber in this twisted mashup of Final Fantasy VII's Nibelheim Mansion and Ultimicia's castle from Final Fantasy VIII. At least that's what I saw. The floor itself is emblazoned with the cycles of the moon and the motions of the planets. It's another reference to keeping time. Beneath the gears of a giant clock overhead, we see 4 statues. 3 of them intact are statues of the timekeepers we previously met in animatronic form, but the 4th one shattered on the floor is actually a subtle reference to the Oracle of Siwa, the secret 4th timekeeper banished to ancient Egypt by He Who Remains. As depicted in the 2005 Fantastic Four comic 4, number 16, the Oracle helps the Fantastic Four fight against not Kang, but rather Kang's son, Ramades, who he had during his time in ancient Egypt as the ruler Rama-Tut. And if that sounds confusing, and needlessly so, don't worry, because it is. It probably won't come into play at all, but if it does, it won't be until Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania at the absolute earliest, so don't sweat it, plenty of time to unpack this particular clue later. Finally, our host makes his triumphant appearance from an elevator, and it's Jonathan Majors looking dapper as hell in a casual version of Kang's purple and green costume from the comics, mixed with his old school getup as Immortus, including that golden medallion right there on his chest. And honestly, I've got to admit, it also kind of evokes Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness from Skyrim, but I know that's not what they're going for here. Anyway, He Who Remains, or Kang as I'll probably just keep calling him, is holding an apple. And this really hammers home that whole Garden of Eden biblical parallel that's going on here. He's tantalizing our heroes with the forbidden fruit of an offer they can't refuse. Also, it parallels Doctor Strange, in which they used an apple to experiment with temporal powers. Now, He Who Remains also thinks it's kinda silly and just a little bit creepy that Miss Minute still calls him He Who Remains, giving us the sense of just how long he's actually been here. He remains unfazed even in the face of Sylvie trying to murk him repeatedly inside the elevator. Using a highly advanced tempad, he teleports around, thwarting her every strike. Inside Kang's weirdly parallel inner sanctum, we see many fine leather-bound books, dueling fireplaces, and a chalkboard containing a number of complex mathematical theorems, likely pertaining to quantum mechanics. Back at the TVA, Mobius confronts Ravonna in her office, and we learn who she really was before she was plucked from the sacred timeline to work at the TVA. That FDR high school pen, sadly not a Molecule Man Easter egg after all. It actually belonged to Ravonna in her real life as the vice principal of FDR High School in Fremont, Ohio, circa 2018. B-15 lures Hunter D-90 and other Minutemen to this timeline where they are forced to face the truth, that Ravonna wasn't always Ravonna. In the background, we can see a degree from The Ohio State University revealing Ravonna's real name is Rebecca Terminette, or Termine. I don't know how she pronounces it because comics. It's a name that she adopted back in Avengers The Terminatrix Objective number 4 to go back in time and live in timely Wisconsin alongside Kang. Back in the Citadel, Kang holds court telling Loki that he's just a flea on the back of a dragon along for an incredible ride over which he has no control. And Kang makes a strong case against free will, arguing that everything that's happened to Loki and Sylvie has been Kang's doing.
I paved the road.
Much like we saw at the TVA in episode 1, he even has printouts of their conversation to prove that he has a record of what will and has happened, which is why Sylvie has such a hard time actually killing him. We get some nice metatextual commentary here about the writing process when Kang teases them about how Loki and Sylvie can't get to the end of their story until they've been changed by the journey. And the banter about free will versus determinism continues back in Ravonna's office, with Renslayer arguing that the TVA is a necessary lie to prevent chaos and death from reigning supreme. And for her, the only way to exercise free will is to be in charge, which is a dangerous line of thinking. Mobius, though, throws Ravonna's line about being friends across time and allies to the end back in her face, but Ravonna argues that Mobius is at fault here, throwing out eons of friendship on a couple of Lokis. And then we see why Mobius is a mere analyst and Ravonna was a hunter before she became judge.
Yep, you're right. Back here again.
Whatever Ravonna read in those files has clearly radicalized her. When we see her next, I doubt she's still gonna be Ravonna Renslayer as we know her. She will pop up again, but probably as her alter ego, the Terminatrix, a woman who seeks to control her own destiny. Someone who's capable of going toe-to-toe with Kang the Conqueror himself. And as demonstrated in the comics, she basically takes over the Avengers and even infiltrates the Council of Cross-Time Kangs, the interdimensional assembly of Kang variants from across the multiverse. So in short, she is not someone to be trifled with. She'll kill you.
Go ahead.
Back in the Citadel, He Who Remains becomes He Who Explains, giving us some much-needed backstory about himself in a roundabout manner. He claims that without him, without the TVA, everything burns. And who would do the burning, you ask? Why, Kang himself, of course! Well, not just any Kang. He alludes to his various identities. Rama Tut is the ruler, Kang is the conqueror, He Who Remains is his current getup, and Jerk has gotta be Immortus because that's just like a douchey thing to call yourself. I'm Immortus, I live forever. Can't you tell by my name?
Jerk.
In the West Coast Avengers comics, Immortus is the guise under which he manipulated Vision and Scarlet Witch to have twin boys, Billy and Tommy, so he could then harness Wanda's potential as a Nexus being. So basically, Immortus's goal is to ensure that no matter what happens in the multiverse, all Kang variants wind up becoming Immortus, and that seems like it's He Who Remains' goal as well. Now, in my headcanon, this is the Immortus that achieved this goal and now is just exhausted by success, because either way, he wins. Kang gives us a Kangvenient visual aid to explain how this Kangnundrum came to be. A variant of himself lived on Earth in the 31st century, and there he discovered there were parallel universes stacked on top of each other. And soon multiple Kangs were Kangmunicating with each other. We even see two Kangs Kanglaborating on building tempads and reset charges that will later be used by the TVA. But soon, this narcissistic peace gives way to all-out multiversal war. That's right, folks, the great conflict teased in the TVA's informational video in episode 1 was a battle of the Kangs, a Kang of the Hill, if you will. And speaking of Kangs, those little Kangs we see playing about even seem to be wearing pared-down versions of their battlesuit from the comics, so nice touch there. However, this Kang managed to devise a way to control Alioth, the creature created from tears in reality which Loki and Sylvie bested in episode 5. Capable of consuming time and space itself, Alioth was the perfect weapon for this Kang to use to win the multiversal war. Eventually, he isolated this timeline, the sacred timeline, then created the Time Variant Authority in order to prune the timeline to ensure what he refers to as ages and ages of cosmic harmony.
You're welcome.
While this Kang has plenty of red in his ledger, he points out that he's the only one keeping the sacred timeline safe from his variants. He teases a number of evil Kangs to come in future outings like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. And then Kang gives Loki and Sylvie a brutal choice.
You kill me and destroy all this, and you don't just have one devil, you have an infinite amount.
Or you two. You two run the thing.
So is Kang lying? Is he telling the truth? Is he trying to make a desperate bid for power? Or is he simply just having a grim bit of fun with these two gods of mischief? Do you choose potentially infinite devils in exchange for free will, or sacrifice choice for a lifetime of safety and convenience? It's a morally gray situation in which there are no real winners or losers, just survivors that have to live with their choices and the consequences. When Sylvie tries to take the high road, Kang gives her a reality check reminding her and Loki they're all villains here. They've all done terrible, horrible, horrific things. And while this conversation is happening, Loki and Sylvie are framed as opposites. They are alike in every way while being polar opposites. Sylvie dressed in all black down to her dagger, Loki dressed in white with a golden blade, each leaning in a mirrored pose. It's like having a little angel and devil on your shoulder, except in this case, the person making the choice is deciding if they'd rather just keep going to work forever or die instead, proving that this Kang is canonically a millennial.
I'm tired.
The conversation then takes a turn as we hear a strange rumbling in the background. Kang reveals that this marks a threshold, a point of no return, where he no longer knows what will happen next. It turns out he didn't know how everything would go, just most things.
I fibbed earlier when I said I know how everything is going to go.
Out the window, we see new branch timelines beginning to form in the absence of the TVA actively pruning them. And Kang, though, is sitting pretty because he's convinced that no matter what happens, he'll just end up right back here where he started.
Reincarnation, baby.
What follows is an all-out fight between Loki and Sylvie, with Kang happily watching in the background. Sylvie leaps to attack Kang, but Loki stops her, urging caution against accidentally starting a new multiversal war. And during this heartfelt yet heated mid-combat conversation, we see that Loki has been changed by the journey, whereas Sylvie cannot put aside her deep-seated convictions to put an end to the TVA once and for all. Things, though, come to a head when Loki interrupts Sylvie's slow-motion death blow on Kang by putting himself at her mercy. He confesses that he doesn't want a throne, he doesn't want to win, he just wants her to be okay. And then, at long last, Sylvie and Loki finally smooch. Although the kiss was likely genuine and Loki has learned to love himself in the most literal way possible, Sylvie used it as a feint, telling Loki, "But I'm not you." She yeets him through a time door back to the TVA using Kang's tempad. And then Sylvie turns he who remains into he who until recently remained. With a cryptic "see you soon," Kang perishes and Sylvie collapses in a heap on the floor. Her mission finally over, she must now live with the consequences of whatever comes next, which, as we'll see, is the birth of a full-blown multiverse. Back at the TVA, the timeline is going positively bazoinkers with new branch timelines as Mobius and B-15 acknowledge there's no more turning back. They share one last for all time, always, as we catch up with a battered, bruised, emotionally ravaged Loki. Although he's right back where he started, this is a very different Loki, one who's not destined to cause pain and suffering. Rather, he truly is the superior Loki, especially compared to the one with whom we started this show. Refusing to give up, Loki steels himself and runs off to find Mobius and B-15, who are worriedly talking about 63 new branch timelines. Now that number could be random, but it does feel like a nod to the year 1963, in which the Avengers first debuted in Marvel Comics in a battle against the god of mischief himself. Now, Loki tries to explain what's going on here, only to discover something horrible. They have no idea who he is.
What?
Meanwhile, the statues of the Timekeepers in the Time Variance Authority lobby, they're gone.
What?
They've been replaced by a singular statue of Kang in his comic book regalia. The damage has already been done. The Kangs are coming and multiversal war is inevitable.
What?
Thankfully, though, this is not the last time we're going to see Loki. As confirmed by the mid-credit scene, the God of Mischief will return in Loki Season 2 at a to-be-determined date, and potentially in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness as well, at least according to The Hollywood Reporter. Regardless, Loki is officially the first Marvel Disney Plus series to be renewed for a second season, and I, for one, can't wait to see what they have in store. In the meantime, though, Loki and the rest of the MCU have to contend with a newly unleashed multiverse full of Kang variants and other surprises that we'll surely see pop up in animated series like What If, and films like Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. As for what this could all be leading towards, well, the very mention of multiversal war immediately evokes Secret Wars. The 2015 Secret Wars storyline involved multiple realities crashing in upon one another until each universe's planet Earth was combined into this surreal interdimensional pocket reality called Battleworld. Considering it's the one story the Russo brothers have gone on record saying they would return to the Marvel Cinematic Universe to direct, it seems likely that Marvel's multiversal story arc could culminate with this tale of interdimensional Game of Thrones. But as always, only time and Miss Minutes will tell.
Hey y'all!
And that is everything we spotted in the Loki finale. Folks, it was a fantastic ending to one of my favorite MCU entries to date. And while it answered many questions, it also gave us some ideas and theories about how Loki could affect upcoming MCU entries as well. And we'll share those with you in the days ahead on Nerdist.com. In the meantime, though, tell us, what did you think of the Loki finale? Did you spot anything that we missed? And what do you want to see from a season 2?
What?
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.